Hello, this is Don Donovan, District Conservationist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service in Rockville, and I also serve as the Southwest Indiana Soil Health Team Leader. Today we're here to talk about cover crops on your farm and how you might be implementing them. And many of you probably have been receiving cost share for them, and what are you going to do when you no longer can receive cost share? It's not available, and how we can justify the use of cover crops. They do cost money, but what inputs can we reduce, or what potential impacts do we have on the soil that are going to help us recoup some of those costs? And that's what we want to talk about today. As we talk about our soil health journey and your soil health journey, we always want to talk about the four soil health principles. They've been talked about a lot, but we always want to emphasize them. And that is to provide a continuous living root, to minimize disturbance on the soil surface, to maximize soil cover, and to maximize biodiversity in our systems. With the fifth principle being bringing grazing back to the our systems. But of these four principles that we have here, cover crops address three of them at least pretty head on. And so that's why in our soil health journey and our systems that we want to build to build a better soil, we always need to talk about cover crops being in that system and a part of it. Why cover crops? Why do we want to do them anyway? Why do we want to put them in our system? We know there's lots of benefits, but why do we do it even if we're not getting cost share? And what are the benefits to be gained by the use of cover crops in a system where we're not getting cost share? And how can we justify that cost? And we know there's a lot of them, but what are they? Here's a list of some of the more common things we talk about when we talk about using cover crops and why. Of course, the first one is one of the erosion control is one of the main reasons that people started using cover crops back in the day. It was to keep the soil covered through the winter when we get these hard rains. Nutrient scavenging. We know that generally there's a lot of leftover nutrients after our cash crops. And many of our cover crops, radishes and a lot of our grasses can scavenge those nutrients and tie them up and keep them from being lost through leaching and other ways, and make them available for the next crop. Building soil organic matter, it's what we want to do. We know we're farming a depleted resource, and so we want to build that soil organic matter back up for many reasons. But the three in the middle here that they're highlighted in red: weed control, moisture control, and temperature control, are the three that we want to talk about today, and how these benefits may not be some of the more common, but maybe some of the more important. We know if we use legumes in our cover crop mix that we can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. We can improve the soil structure, reduce compaction, build a soil that's not so susceptible to the heavy equipment that we tend to put on it. Grazing, if you have cattle, we always want to talk about bringing livestock back to the system, but they do provide that benefit of some grazing outside of our normal pastures. And perhaps the most important that we always want to talk about, we have to build a resilient soil. It's irregardless of where we have climate change or we just have natural fluctuating climates, but we have to be able to deal with changes and even out the highs and the lows, even out the wet and the dry years, and try to build a soil that can produce a crop every year and produce a good crop every year. So that's what we want to talk about. That's our soil health journey, building that resilient soil. It is all about the soil organic matter. We know that over time, if as we've looked at soil organic matter levels in our soil since the conversion from either woodland or from prairie soils here in Indiana, that we've lost a significant amount of our original soil organic matter. And one time we thought we possibly couldn't ever recoup that, but we're finding out with some of these systems that follow our four principles that we can build that soil organic matter back, and we can build a resilient soil, and we can build a soil that deals with changes, and we can build a soil that will produce a good crop every year. So our ultimate goal with our soil health journey, with our systems, with our cover crop, with our four principles, is to build that soil organic matter back to a level that's closer to what it was before it was converted to cropland. The mining of soil organic matter is not an option in our current systems, because these are some of the the benefits of each percent of organic matter that's in your soil. The 10,000 pounds of carbon relates to the ability to be resilient and to develop a healthy soil. 1,000 pounds of nitrogen. Do we always need to put on commercial nitrogen? I think we're finding out that we don't have to. 100 pounds of phosphorus, 100 pounds of sulfur, but that bottom one, every 1% of soil organic matter levels you have means you have a soil that can store anywhere between 3/10 and an inch of water, and we can infiltrate it, we can store it, and that's the main overall arching reason that we talk about building a healthy soil through improving our soil organic matter. But maybe the most important thing is that water. What value can you put on an additional half an inch to an inch of rain in August during a dry summer? In 2012, most of the Corn Belt was under a pretty significant drought, and that half inch to an inch of rain, the potential to store that half inch to an inch of rain, could have been the difference between a crop in 2012 and other really dry years that was not so bad. It was a pretty decent crop, and maybe a total crop failure. It's not necessarily how much rain you get, but when you get it, and it coming at the right time during pollination or ear fill or that kind of thing. So as we talk about our soil health journey and trying to build a resilient soil, it's to deal with these outlier years like 2012 was, and to store water for those dry years, so we can at least even out the highs and lows and from year to year and in our crop yields, and always to produce a crop that is at least average or better. So that's the soil health journey, trying to store that water. The meat and potatoes of cover crops. So, we talk about basics that we always want to talk about when we talk about a system, but the one thing we always encourage you to do is when you get ready to plant a cover crop, always have a purpose in mind. Always have a reason, or a primary and a secondary purpose that you want that cover crop to do for you, because your purpose dictates what species you'll plant, when you'll plant, how you'll terminate it. Are you going to terminate it early? Are you going to plant green, terminate it later? What species do you want to try to build a soil organic matter? Are you trying to keep the soil covered? All those kind of things dictate what you're going to do with your cover crops in your system. So always have a purpose in mind. It may change from year to year. It may change from field to field, but always have a purpose in mind when you take the piece of equipment you're going to plant cover crops out there and start planting. Okay, let's start talking about those three things that we talked about earlier that we were going to talk about today, and that is weed control, moisture control, and temperature control. And probably the key to those, all three of those, is the use of cereal rye as your cover crop. And cereal rye, of course, is a cereal grain. It's an overwintering spring growing species, so the lack of fall growth doesn't always mean that you'll not have issues in the spring with termination, or that you'll not have any cover at all, because what you have today or over winter does not necessarily mean what you're going to have in the spring. So you always got to be prepared to deal with it in the spring, have multiple plans in place. But cereal rye grows all winter. It can put roots down 40 inches deep, and that's why it takes off and grows so well in the spring as it starts to warm up. But one thing we're always cognizant of with cereal rye is the carbon nitrogen ratio rises as it matures. It's fairly low when it's in the vegetative state here, like in this picture, but as it moves towards maturity and senescence, then that carbon nitrogen ratio comes up drastically. But that high carbon to nitrogen ratio is what we want if we want season long mat of carbon, or of rye cover crop on the soil surface. So we want that high carbon nitrogen ratio, but it does provide challenges that we have to be prepared to deal with. Okay, so this chart gives us some average carbon and nitrogen ratios of different cover crops and different species, and you'll see here is a rye cover crop is in the vegetative state. When it's growing early in the spring, it's somewhere around 26-1, and the soil microbiology like a 24-1, and so it's pretty close to that. But it goes towards anthesis or maturity, it gets up towards 37-1, and then rye straw is 82-1, one of the highest carbon nitrogen ratios of anything of any crop that we might put out there. So while it will present challenges from a management standpoint, it is the reason that we can use cereal rye as a cover crop after it's terminated to protect the soil through the growing season. So always be thinking about your carbon nitrogen ratio because it drives our system, and we always have to present that we were prepared to deal with the challenges it does present. Okay, a little bit about cereal rye spring management in our systems, and of course, in Indiana, we're pretty much corn and soybeans, but we can plant corn green into mature rye. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you're just getting started in your soil health journey and the use of cover crops, because it can provide challenges. Because corn needs nitrogen, we all know that, and if we have this mature rye laying on the soil surface, that the microbiology in the soil will use up the available nitrogen to start breaking that rye down. And so if you're going to try to plant corn into mature rye, you have to pretty much be ready to put some starter in your planter and give that corn some early nitrogen, and you better be potentially ready to early side dress, because you might have some corn that's a little bit nitrogen starved, and so we don't want that. So be cognizant of that if you're planting corn into cereal rye green or a very mature cereal rye. Soybeans, on the other hand, they respond to nitrogen starved environment. They like it. They respond to that by potentially starting to nodulate quicker. Soybeans need nitrogen too. I mean, they probably need more nitrogen per bushel than corn does, but they have that ability as a legume to produce their own. So they will respond to that nitrogen starved environment if you have that rye mat and start producing nodules quicker and start that nitrogen cycling. So let's start talking about our three benefits of cereal rye mat on the soil surface that we've been talking about in this presentation. The first, we're going to talk about some moisture control, and we know that if we have that mat on the soil surface, that we're reducing evapotranspiration, we're protecting the soil surface from the hard beating sun. We know that we can prevent soil crusting. I mean, soil crusting is strictly tied back to tillage and the soil surface not being protected, and we get these rains and we get the first erosion when the soil particles on the surface break down and start to move in, and then we get a hot sun that causes that crusting, and we can deal with that and prevent that with this mat such as this picture has in it of cereal rye. We keep the soil surface moisture. If you go out into a field and you rake that rye back on a hot day, and you're going to see moisture there, where if you're out in a field that doesn't have any, you're going to see a lack of moisture in the soil surface. And we know that this allows for more infiltration. That's the whole idea. We don't want runoff. We want infiltration. We want that water in the soil where it can do work for us, and not running down our streams and taking nutrients and sediment with it. So we know that we get heavy rains during the summer. That's July typically is the month we get the most rain in the year. So if we can protect the soil when we get these heavy rains, that we'll put that water to work for us and store it for later uses. One of the major input costs that most farmers have in their system is weed control, and so can we use cover crops to offset some of these herbicide costs? And a lot of weed seeds need sun to germinate. If they're laying on the soil surface, this cover crop mat will keep the sun from the soil surface and keep some of these weed seeds from germinating. And a system of no-till and cover crops, if we can provide a better habitat. One thing that is starting to become more prevalent is the discussion of beneficial insects. And there's several species of beetles that live in the soil. These beetles feed on weed seeds and slugs and other things, and so, but they don't like their habitat destroyed. I mean, they don't like their home destroyed. And if we can keep a cover of cover crop residue out there, they live under that residue, and they spend the night eating weed seeds. And the cover crop mat's especially impactful in the source of some of our herbicide-resistant weeds. Water hemp is a serious problem in Indiana. Mare's tail has become resistant to some herbicide applications, and Palmer pigweed is unfortunately headed our way. So we need to be prepared to deal with these in other manner besides herbicides. And cover crops have an impact. It's shown that cereal rye can reduce the issues with some of these hard-to-kill weeds. And there's reasons with the sun, keeping the sun off the surface is one, and another is if we can keep these weed seeds from germinating for a period of a few months, then they lose their ability to germinate. So the whole idea is to keep them from allowing to germinate, keep the sun off the soil surface so they won't germinate for us. And so if these cover crops can help us suppress weeds, then potentially we have another tool in the toolbox to deal with the control outside of herbicide use. And hopefully, if we can reduce herbicide use, we can reduce the potential impacts of herbicide use. And so, if we use cover crops to help us with weed control, we get all these other benefits that we talk about that come with them, and to build a healthy soil. So weed control, if we have that mat out there all during the growing season, we can get some real benefit from our cover crop. Soil temperature control is another one of the many benefits of having a growing season-long mat of cereal rye residue. Every form of commercial nitrogen that we might use has to pass through the form of microbiology to convert it to a form that plant roots can pick up and use. And most microbiology are just like Goldilocks. They don't like it too hot or too cold. They like it just right. And so we want that mat on the soil surface to protect the surface and to get us a constant temperature so we don't have these great fluctuations between night and day. And when the microbiology are happy, or they're just like we are, they're more active, they work harder, and they do more for you in producing available nitrogen. They usually like it somewhere in the 80 to 90 degree range. That's when they're most active, and they can actually, we can sterilize the soil if the soil temperature gets over 120 degrees or 115 degrees. So when the soil temperature becomes too hot, the microbiology can die, they can go dormant, they can go deeper in the soil. They reduce this nitrogen availability and efficiency that we need right when our corn crop needs it. Well, this might be seem a little cartoonish or for the average farmer, but there is a lot of good information here. And as we want to talk about the differences between having the soil covered and protected from the sun and from the other elements, and having the biology fed, and versus a bare soil. And we know that there are major benefits over time to keeping the soil covered through as much of the year as we can. So we can learn through something that's maybe for kids, but as adults we can learn from it too, and learn that as we go on a soil health journey, there are things we can do to build a better soil. Okay, let's talk about some considerations in the use of cereal rye for these three purposes that we've talked about. And in general, you're probably going to have to bring your seeding rates up if you want season-long soil surface protection. If you're just using a cover crop for other reasons, that may not be enough. And so you're probably looking at bringing your seeding rates up higher than you would normally. And as you stay in this system, and as you build soil health, and as you get your microbiology working for you, over time, you're probably going to have to bring them up even more, because the soil biology, you get it to doing its thing and build the soil health, and all of a sudden you have trouble keeping surface covered with residue, because the biology is breaking it down faster and faster. So that's something you'll need to talk about, think about, be prepared to deal with as you move through your journey. And another thing we want to talk about when we're doing this is potentially putting the rye on the ground with a roller crimper. Whether you terminate it with a roller crimper or you terminate with herbicide and then put it on the ground, getting it down on the ground and getting it flat on the surface provides that season-long control that we'd like to have. And so I can't reiterate enough that you need to have a nitrogen management plan if you're planting corn and doing this. It is going to tie up nitrogen. You're going to have to deal with that in whatever way, whether that's side dress, whether that's putting it on with a planter or some other manner. You're going to have to front load some nitrogen when you're planting corn into these high carbon and nitrogen ratio cereal rye mats. This is just a list of some resources to help you out. There's a lot of good information out there. You can usually start with your Soil and Water Conservation District and Natural Resources Conservation Service office. The SARE book is an incredibly good resource. You can pick those up either as a digital or you can purchase a copy, but it has information on about everything we ever planned as a cover crop. The Midwest Cover Crop Council has a tool that helps you decide what species to plant. Our NRCS seeding tool helps you with rates and developing mixes and and so that we know that we're getting enough seed out there. And it's just some information. And one thing I didn't put on here, that always look to find someone in your area that's making it work on your kind of soils, your kind of climate. But find a farmer, find a mentor, find somebody that's willing to talk to you about how they made it work, and to help you from making some mistakes. And, we don't want anybody to fail. We want everybody to succeed and to continue on this journey. So always look for a mentor to help you out. Well, it's time for some questions or comments, and I hope that this presentation has helped you. I hope it's helped you start thinking. That's what we want to do, to plant seeds, to continue on your soil health journey, to not look back, but to look forward. We want everybody to move forward, and there are, over time, this is not a quick thing. It takes time to develop these systems. It takes time to build your soil, and over time, we know that there's economic benefits to be had from the use of cover crops that goes way past the cost of cover crops through improved soil health and improved ability to deal with changes in our climate, in our rainfall, and all those kind of things, and over time potentially reduce some commercial inputs. Now, if we could reduce them, that's an economic benefit as well as a potential environmental benefit. And so we want to be not only regenerative from a standpoint of our soil, but regenerative and sustainable economically, because if we can't do that, there's no sense talking about anything else. It has to be sustainable economically. So if you got any questions, feel free to get with me, and we'll discuss them. Thank you.